They say it never come to fruition unless the vision is crafted. My drive is relentlessly, repetitiously mastered. Progress is positive, pessimism is backward. Since failure ain't attractive, my next decision was drastic.
I want to start with let's say the gun control policies, because I think that that's becoming more and more um of a hot topic in the nation with the push for a ban on rifles. So one
Right.
thing that popped in my head that kind of got my wheels turning is I seen a interview where Joe Biden actually suggested that Americans don't need rifles and we should just buy shotguns. He actually suggested that people buy shotguns instead of rifles. And I thought that that was interesting because his whole platform was that he was trying to minimize mass shootings, mass murder. That's supposed to be the reason why they want to push a ban on assault rifles. At least that's what they're telling the general public. So because I know a little bit about guns, I'm like, well, I mean, shotguns can do a lot of damage too. So that would not make sense to try to ban assault rifles, saying that as if people couldn't kill, 4 or 5 people with a shotgun, you know,
Yeah.
especially if you know anything about buckshots and even semi-automatic shotguns where you don't even have to pump in between rounds. I just thought that that was interesting that he would suggest um, buy a shotgun because now it made me a little more curious as to why would they want to ban these rifles all of a sudden, because now that made it clear that the agenda had nothing to do with minimizing mass murder. So what do you think about have you heard about that, or what do you think, what's your take on just gun control and guns in general? Maybe let's start with that.
Well, yeah, my take on it is that I think sometimes the way we process things in this country, in particular with the mindset with which we process things here, I oftentimes think we intellectually hustle backwards. And what I mean is, it's good to be versed on the particulars of any given subject or topic or situation at any given time. And that's important situationally. But when you talk about overall effectiveness and when you talk about cause and effect relationships, sometimes we hustle backwards intellectually. So if we look at gun control measures, say we compare other parameters as, as far as gun control goes, you look at Canada, the amount of gun ownership in Canada, for example, um, versus contrasted with how many mass shootings they have there. And when you look at the United States at gun ownership per capita and how many, mass shooting events we have here, I think you can see there's obviously not a necessary correlation between per capita gun ownership and acts of mass shootings.
Hmm.
And what I mean is, yeah, people own guns in other places, like in the outback, Australia, Canada, but
Mhm.
people mainly use them for hunting. There are some maybe aggravated instances of domestic or disputes that may rise to that level um, of gunplay, but it's very, it's not typical. It may be on the rise as of late, which is an indicator of a bigger problem like that I will point to in the United States. So when I say intellectually hustling backwards, I mean looking at the result and the symptoms and the signs and symptoms of a thing and then confusing that with being the cause.
Hmm.
So you have gun ownership at a relatively high rate in the United States, but per capita, you have way more mass shootings and shootings that happen in the United States as compared to other countries that are not even, necessarily as well off as the United States, or at least, first world countries. So I think when you talk about issues of deeper causes, like economic, social economic disparities, mindsets of the people are very racialized and segregated in this country. And I
Hmm.
think the dissension and the hostility, the instances of hostility is heightened when you have uh, a segregated society, because you have more tribalism and sections, and more disparate opportunities for conflicts to arise. So, for example, if you have a Dylan Ruth type who identifies as a male, and then a white male, and then a an Aryan white male, for example. So all of those categories provide for an individual to be ostracized, to be individualized, right, or to be specialized within a smaller, more hostile group.
Hmm.
So as a white Aryan male, besides a lot of the other appendages that go along with that, you could put young, you could put, you know, uh,
Hmm.
mentally challenged or economically challenged, whatever. But white Aryan male is sufficient enough to put him at odds with um, black, with a black community, with a black group of people that are in a place of worship. And I think we often go right to, okay, people have too many guns. What do they need them for? When we overlook the entire classification of people and the racism that seem,
Hmm.
and the runaway capitalism, and the media that seems to undergird and encourage and create a platform psychologically and in reality in society for the majority of this. And that's hustling backward intellectually. And it's politically safe to talk about, oh, there's too many guns. I'm going to pass a bill for gun control. Look, I did something about, the mass shootings. When to tackle racism, runaway capitalism, obviously, right, that's not as a politically viable solution.
Hmm.
Any politician is not going to want to tackle that. So, that's my startup opinion on it.
That makes sense. Yep. So basically, they trying to use, they're using it as an excuse as to why this is happening without addressing the bigger issue, or the even the cause more so than the bigger issue. And I agree that that's kind of what I get from it, especially after hearing those comments from the president himself, and the vice president as well, where it just seems to be a good opportunity to capitalize off of doing something for whatever reason. Maybe it's just to gain more support. I don't see how it really affects people when it comes to making restrictions on what type of guns people can buy, because I personally don't believe that the type of gun is going to change somebody's mind as to whether they want to go out and shoot somebody. I think if you have that in your mind, you're going to find a way to get the gun, and you're going to find a way to do it, because there's always going to be black markets and all of those things for any type of person who's actually a criminal or actually seeking to do that type of thing, where the people who are law abiding, who are going to the stores and getting their licenses, and doing everything pretty much by the book and by the law, those are the people who really get affected, and it just makes no sense. That's how I kind of see it. So gun control is just another one of those things I want to keep an eye on, just to see where it goes, because I am curious as to what the long-term goal for this movement is. So then we
Yeah.
can.
I just wanted to add in there.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was looking at an article about the House passes gun control bills to strengthen background checks. So it seems like the gist of most of the gist of what they're trying to do at this time is do more thorough background checks, close some loopholes where people can purchase guns either at gun shows or offline, that sort of uh, go around what would be the Federal Bureau of Investigation's background checks criteria. So they shrink the amount of time that the FBI has to screen someone from a gun. For example, if they're buying it at a gun show,
Mm-hmm.
um, or they can go around it altogether. And they want to propose legislation. Well, this is what they're floating out there
Right.
to give the FBI, increase the time for them to do background checks, etc. But like what you're saying is, I agree with what you're saying. It's people that are going to get guns to do damage, right? They're not going to be as concerned about, or they're not going to be as hampered by, I don't think, stricter gun legislation. Obviously, there'll be, if they close that dragnet, there will be some individuals that may be discouraged from getting certain types of guns.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, again, the overall problem, if it's not addressed, um, yeah, you take an automatic assault rifle from a person, so now you decrease the effective range of the weapon, right? So if they're at a parking lot, and they're shooting in individual lines, or if they have lines of sight, or if they have the ability to shoot longer range or snipe.
Mm-hmm.
But then you let them have a shotgun, they saw it off, and then they catch a bunch of people at closer range, or they go to other sorts of terroristic devices like
Right.
improvised explosive devices, or
Exactly.
poisoning. There's all sorts of things that people will resort to cause damage, pain, and suffering and death, as long as those sort of underlying social problems exist,
Right.
and the measures of happiness in a country that's so materialistic, but rates amongst the lowest in the developed nations amongst measures of happiness,
Mm-hmm.
contentment, when these sorts of studies are done on people and to measure happiness and how content people are with their lives. The United States ranks amongst the lowest, like a third world country almost.
Yeah.
So
No, that makes sense. I believe it because you can see it, and it's a violence problem. So that's an American issue. But they like to isolate, this violence, and even segregate it. That's how you get black on black violence versus domestic terrorism, and it is all, you can separate it, but at the end of the day, there's really a violence problem. And I think if a person is really focused on violence, it shouldn't be segregated. You should just try to minimize the violence as best as possible in all areas because it's really all kind of a common link. First of all, the black on black violence thing is, in my opinion, it makes no sense to even have that phrase as a term, especially when you know about people committing crimes in close proximity to where they live. So if you live in a black community and you're a black person, most likely you're not going to go outside of your neighborhood to commit a crime. Just like um, if you're an Asian person in an Asian community, you wouldn't go outside of your community to commit a crime. So crime is fairly segregated. So all crime can be coined, black on black or white on white, Asian on Asian, so forth and so on. But that's a whole nother story. You want to comment on that since I kind of just brought it up?
yeah, for sure, I would say that I think we got to look at, often cases it comes down to reality versus hyperbole and versus propaganda. So we have one reality. You have truth, you have things that are true, and then you have things that are real. But then you can have propaganda in media that goes against what is true, and then it can ultimately try and influence the reality. And there's a problem when that happens. For example, if the media spins a narrative of black on black violence, which black on black violence, quote unquote, is technically a reality if you have people that are defined as black that practice violence against each other. But then to exalt black on black violence as something that is special or especially horrific, or something that is particular to black people, and all these sorts of things, now you're getting into distortions of truth and reality. But
Mm-hmm.
see, that becomes very real in the minds and the psyches of people, because They watch the news, they watch the media, they buy into it. So they sort of are being trained in sort of a skewed reality. Because the truth in that and the actual reality is, yes, there's intra and intergroup violence. So when you look at whites or Caucasians that are in charge of militaries and governments that drop bombs and they kill hundreds of millions of people, right? And say U.S. is at war with Russia, or even on smaller scales, you've got white on white crime,
Mm-hmm.
where a mass shooter goes into a high school and shoots things up, or, they're selling drugs to each other, or they're, running sex trafficking or human trafficking rings. These could all technically be defined as instances of quote unquote white on white violence, right?
Right.
Because you have people from different Eurocentric backgrounds who are defined as Caucasian or Caucasoid. They have, paler skin, and they're practicing violence against each other. But obviously, the media doesn't present it sort of in that framework.
Right.
So I think that what we as Black people, while everybody falls victim to skewed media perceptions, we as Black people, I think, need to be particularly careful about that, because we historically and actually always stand, we have the most to lose by
Mm-hmm.
buying into skewed narratives, because 9 times out of 10, those narratives are going to be skewed against us. They're not going to be skewed to make us look like supermen and superwomen and responsible people and pure as the wind driven snow as soon as we show up in the room.
Mm-hmm.
The narrative is not that. The narrative is that we're Black.
Right.
We're Black like the Black Day, like a Black Sabbath, like a Black Mark. We share we share an identity with a metaphor that means wickedness and evil. That's our metaphor. So we have to be extra careful about buying into sort of these any narrative that's coming from the media. I mean, I think we would be more sane to instinctively question what comes from mainstream media, not as a delayed response, but our first instinct should be to question and to prove it,
Mm-hmm.
and
I
then
agree.
accept what seems to be reasonable based on truth and reality. Not run with the narrative first and then make someone else prove, a counter narrative. I think
Right. Yep.
we get it wrong in that sense.
Yep. I agree with that. I think that is something that we have to be more conscious of, as just the media in general and how it will portray Black people. Um, but yeah, and that's all. It's all kind of related to, and to talk about gun control and police shootings of African American people. I think there's always a relation, because for some reason, and always is a line of racism, kind of like you say, with any of these movements or any of these things. There's always something. It affects Black people the worst, if that makes sense. Where I could see just about any policy, even if you take gun control, I could see that affecting Black gun owners more than anybody. I could see that, just like with the Black Panthers, everything was fine and dandy. Black Panthers start exercising their rights to carry and whatnot, and you just see this push for gun control. And it's kind of the same thing now. More Black people are starting to exercise their rights to carry firearms, and it's like we have to control, gun control, and and they're using these mass shootings um, as an avenue to encourage people to get these pushes. But
Facts.
with the police shootings, not to get too specific on anyone, but it's almost like it's becoming more and more frequent, where it's like, you go from maybe one or two, three a year that you see on the news to almost one like every month, every couple of weeks, you just hearing about, somebody really getting killed by the police. And it just make me ask the question again with the media is like, why why are they so eager to show it? Why are they so eager to let it be known that this is a problem? However, nobody's really doing anything about it. It kind of makes it seem disingenuous, where it's like, um, if you really thought this was a problem, and you'll see this a lot with Caucasian uh, broadcasters, like news media outlets, where they will kind of do this, I guess, sympathetic type of spiel about how this is wrong and it's clearly a problem with the police force, and people need to do something about it. And they'll just keep showing these violent, brutal killings on TV. However, police officers may express violence towards people who are not African American, but you just don't see it as much. Now, of course, black people are affected at a disproportionate rate, so we know that it's a bigger black issue, I would say, because we know the racial undertone to it. But again, I would have to ask myself, why are they so eager to show, black people being brutalized on TV versus other people who are being brutalized? They just won't show it. So, what's your take kind of on that?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Let me just do a brief run up, um, maybe call it historical, but just a general context.
Yep.
Whenever you want to suppress a people, there are means with which to suppress a people. And the preferred method to suppress a people is to have the people sort of cooperate in their own oppression, otherwise be brainwashed. This is where media comes in. This is where, when you get Black people feeling inferior based on the constant barrage of messages and advertising that we receive through media. Okay, that's the preferred method of keeping a people in their place. Oppressors typically don't like to resort to outright violence. That's typically a sign that they're losing control in many instances, because that's going to be the thing that sort of upsets the cart the most.
Hmm.
Now, that being said, Black people in America, and when I use Black, I, to be specific, I would mean Black Americans, or descendants of slavery, or at least people generationally that have been in this country,
Hmm.
who have been effectively and generationally influenced by media and identity,
Hmm.
as opposed to more recent arrivals, not wanting to offend anyone, but recent arrivals of quote unquote Black people who do not necessarily define themselves as Black, and neither have been subjected generationally to the sort of brainwashing campaigns. But that being said, media, so you would have brainwashing, getting people to be, to sort of feel less about themselves and sort of give up and not try, and to have all these sort of inferiority complexes and self-hate complexes. That way the oppressor doesn't have to directly hold a person down. That person will find a backdoor for themselves, and that's sort of the most efficient way to keep a population oppressed. And there are economic hands, there are economic parameters to that, there are media parameters to that. But that being said, when we talk about media, and you talk about the rise in police violence and anti-Black violence, especially as being portrayed by the media, I think you have two things happening. And one of the things is that there could actually be a rise in anti-Black violence situations.
Hmm.
Either there's an actual rise in it, and or there's a rise in the media coverage. Now, we have to know is that with the advent of technology and cell phones and small cameras, and sort of this making everybody a reporter, as it were, you obviously have a greater scope of coverage of these things. And this is something that's outside of mainstream media control.
Hmm.
So, but
Right.
what we wind up seeing typically is the media co-opting this and apparently showing this, and they're putting it out there as if they're sympathetic, like you said. But in actuality, what I think it is, and what I think it could be, is the other side of that sword, of that double-edged sword, is that you are mounting sort of a psychological warfare against Black people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like we will think, oh, if the media is showing us getting murdered, then they're sympathetic and they're showing a problem.
Right.
But on the other side of the coin is, if you can imagine, for example, when you go, if a child goes to the school and a child is getting bullied by someone who has an advantage in the situation over them. In the case of a child, is the other person is either an adult or they're bigger, they're more powerful. And when that child comes into that school, if that child is not bowing and giving up the lunch money on time, what the bully will do is they will engage in acts of violence against that helpless child.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the point of doing that is to put the child in its place, to traumatize the child, right? But actually, all those other kids on the school ground, it's not that the bully actually doesn't want them to see. When it comes time to make an example of somebody and exert authority and power over somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those other kids might look and say, "Oh, damn, that's too bad," right? He's beating up on him again, right? He's beating up on Devontae again or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, that sympathy on the part of other people doesn't equate to power. See, the bully is still bigger and more powerful. And even though other people see what the bully is doing, that can actually help to establish the bully's authority. Because the bully is like, yeah, I'm going to kick your ass. I want you to know it. I want everybody out here to know it. In case anybody gets any ideas, I'm big, I'm a badass. Don't mess with me.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been sort of socialized to think like, okay, the media is showing this, therefore that's sympathetic, but it's actually not empowering.
Right.
Empowering is when the person that's getting picked on doesn't feel any qualms about fighting back.
Right.
When they feel like, oh, I'm fighting this bully back, oh, that must make me as bad as the bully. I'm stooping to his level. No, it means you're
Mm-hmm.
fighting back.
Right.
And all those other people on the school ground are going to respect that person when they stand up, don't give their lunch money for free, and they fight back, right? And they're willing to take a ass kicking or go down swinging. That doesn't make that person, that's actually more accurate on a pathway to empowerment versus everybody, look what he's doing to me. Don't you all feel sorry for me?
Mm-hmm.
They other people may or may not feel sorry for that person. They may actually despise that person. They may actually think that person is very weak,
Right.
which is the opposite effect. So yeah, that's what I suspect as far as mainstream being willing to show and barrage us with these constant images of violence against Black people. I think it actually can be a sort of psychological warfare and trauma. Same as when back in the lynching era, when Black people knew, right, they were lynching on an average of 2 to 4 Negroes every week,
Mm-hmm.
and there was thousands of Negroes lynched within the space of a couple years, and they put that in the newspaper beforehand.
Right.
Everybody show up to the lynching, and then you could get pieces of a Negro and postcards, and if you couldn't make it, you get postcards, and you could put it in your mason jars, and the taxidermist would preserve the ear or whatever. I
Right.
mean, all those sorts of things was done shamelessly by a nation, and foreign policy at the time. Yeah, people thought United States is getting exposed. That these things are going into the press, but in actuality, it a lot of Negroes were traumatized by that. Entire generations of Negroes were traumatized by that and raised their children to be afraid and fear white people
Right.
because of those terror campaigns that not only happen in the backwoods of the southern countries, but they run the front page of newspapers, you know, every week, so at
Right.
least every month, and across the nation, north, south, Midwest, New York.
Right.
So
No, that makes sense. That would make sense because like I said, you see it more and more, but I feel like it's very select in what they show on the media, and I think it's, people should be able to hold the media responsible because those type of things, if the common person was to do something that provocative, they would definitely get not only criticized, but sometimes you could even go to jail for certain type of things when you like inciting a riot or putting that type of terrorizing people with certain images and things like that. Can
Yeah.
people can be held accountable on criminal charges. And I feel like the news gets away with a lot of it because they have the support of the nation. When you really look at it, when you really weed everything out, it's because everybody who's tuning in and watching this, they're in support of it. If they're not the victims, or if they're not a part of that oppressed group, then everybody else kind of gets a kick out of it in one way or another, because that's the only way you wouldn't be outraged by it. Even if it wasn't affecting you, you would just say that's not right, because if I was that person or that group of people, I wouldn't want to see that. And um and they never show, aside from police killings, they never really show on the news the countless attacks that police just have that are not even fatal. But just things like multiple African American women uh, accusing police officers of rape. You don't see that on the news, and it's like,
Yeah.
why do you have to research that? But you want to say that you're targeting police reform, but you're still only focusing on things that are pretty much, I would say, debatable, because you can always say, well, the officer was authorized to use deadly force. But if you talking rape, there's no authorization for rape. There's no policy. There's no argument there. So even when it's a clear cut case of use of force, use of force is still something that can be argued every time versus something like a rape charge. And if you see how big that is, then I think people will get the bigger picture of what police brutality is in the black community and how it affects different people, or just how they treat the younger kids who are minors. Um, you know,
Yeah.
things like that of that nature. You don't really see that as often, but you will see it from time to time, because I think, again, that nobody really wants to address the real issue, like you said back in the beginning, which is the racial components of it. Like, this is clear cut racism, but they want to make it about everything other than that. So that's why you'll see the footage of people getting shot, because now you can just make that about a shooting and not necessarily racism.
Right. And I agree. I think the thing is the dominant society, especially when it comes to media, which is the propaganda arm of, I mean, if we want to call it white supremacy, there is a correlation with whites and power and the group that sort of controls the media. I think they are very keen authors of confusion. And when I say confusion, they're masters at bringing several uh, different sort of a variety of different focals of concentration and topics and subject matters and questions and what about this and what about that, all together in the scope of even just one story or one subject that is apparently cut and dry.
Hmm.
But they will bring all these different points of view and sort of just different what do you call that when a person is short attention span, like they're masters at confusion. So the
Hmm.
root being con, meaning with, and fusion, to bring things together. So when you're fusing different things, you can look at a police killing of a person, and then all of a sudden, when the topic gets uh, streamlined with, well, he was running, or should he have been running, or should we do reform, and what should reform consist of, and the officers are from the suburbs, and what about race, and what about race in America? He's never seen black people, and all of a sudden the topic is so confused and muddled that we lose sight of it. And it winds up being this sort of intellectual just scrimmage where anybody is saying anything and nobody's hearing anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to say to your point, like segregation, at one point we had actual segregation in this country, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that segregation was supposedly outlawed, but we know that we still have social economic segregation, which is the whole point. When you have black people concentrated physically in the spaces that are the most deprived in all aspects of well-being, economically, educationally, spiritually, um, diet, nutritionally.
Mm-hmm.
So we have segregation, but also we have, with the rise of media and even social media, I think segregation itself has become so sophisticated that we even have a psychological segregation, to where you can have a person who is a human being, you can have a whole other group of people who also call themselves human beings, and they will look at what's happening to, say, human being A, melanated human being A, and group over here that's in a group of self-professed human beings B, and they see themselves as separate psychologically. So
Mm-hmm.
they see that person and they don't see them as human, even though they profess that they're humans. And they'll say that on some levels, oh, this is a shame. But those black people, right, they need to um, stand up for themselves, or do this or that, or stop the behavior they're doing. It gets put back on black people, because I think other groups are psychologically segregated. I think segregation is great. I
Mm-hmm.
think you can have people that, I think segregation, it goes to the point to where you can have individuals that are segregated in their own mind. You
Mm-hmm.
can have a black person, a white person come together intimately. They can be as close as they can be physically, to the point that they're unified physically, and
Mm-hmm.
they're psychologically segregated. And the white person still, their worldview is a white worldview. The black person sees themselves as, black, and all of the metaphorical trauma and disconnectedness that goes along with that. And then you can have a child from that unity, and that child can see themselves as belonging to two polar opposite groups in society, being
Mm-hmm.
one individual.
Right.
That's how sophisticated segregation has become. And it's nothing new. But again, I would just say, summing that diatribe up, is that we as people defined as black, us as black people, black Americans, there's obviously something so special about us, because there's so much money, time, resources, and focal and attention that's put on us to
Right.
be these so-called nobodies. There's sure a hell of a lot of attention and effort that goes into making sure that's constantly checking for us what we're doing, what we're making, what we're creating, where we're at, what kind of laws are there. There's street three strikes laws. Is there marijuana laws? Is there,
Mm-hmm.
prison? Are we gonna make them fight forest fires or wear bracelets, open air prisons, all this sort of stuff
Right.
that
Oh, real.
we revolve around and revolves around us, to that we have to opt out of media definitions, these false realities, and start to do some deep soul searching as to who we are, and not definitively, not categorically, but who we are truthfully, like who we are in our being, like who are we going to define ourselves, and so
Right.
we can start coming up with solutions.
No, definitely, man. That's deep. Actually, the way that you put that, that's the segregation piece was nice. I'm gonna have to re-listen to that. But
Man.
yeah, no, because it's true, and I think that kind of sums that up real good. I want to kind of end that piece on that note. because I think that sums it up real good as to what we're dealing with. When we see the news kind of selectively basically poke at black people and kind of show us like, aha, this is how you're being treated, and we're going to act like we care, but we really don't, so we're just going to keep showing you how bad this is and how worse it can get. Which,
Yes, exactly.
yeah, and it
But
shows. Go ahead.
can just add something real quick. There's a double-edged sword to that. And I want to say white supremacy is not almighty. And what
Right.
I mean is the same way they study and sort of tweak methods of oppression generationally for us. I mean, like this generation, it may be trying to get our young men to, sort of wear skirts, and you got P. Diddy out in skirts and
Mm-hmm.
purses, and, Kirk Franklin and this and that, which that seems, and, Young Thug, and not to just point fingers or get in
Yeah,
any sort of
well,
trouble, but just to say, defining us and who we're supposed to be and using popular culture as a method to do that. They've sort of tweaked that and do that generationally,
mm-hmm.
but they are not almighty. So, in the sense that when they come out and show this plethora of police videos and violence against black people, and then show the perpetrator get off free, yeah, that sends a message, sort of as a bully would. Look, don't mess with me, because
Mm-hmm.
I can do it. You can't do anything about it. um the back the the kick to that, the what is that word, backfire, not backfire, anyway,
Mm,
the blowback to
yeah.
that would be, the blowback to that is, yes, the bully is revealing themselves as a bully, and they are in essence provoking people to stand up for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And in as much as, while the bully, that's why I said they prefer to do things under wraps, to throw the rock and hide the hand and make it look like the oppressed people are actually the ones that's doing it to themselves. Because the minute they come out and start to use direct violence and to reveal themselves as perpetrators of direct violence, the more they sort of unmask the devil, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that becomes more risky, because then not only do black people see more of a recognizable enemy, whereas at first they may think it's that nigga down the street,
Right.
James and them niggas down the street is who's messing with me. The more black people themselves are able to see like who actual apex perpetrators are, right? That sort of serves as a rallying cry at the same time. And also the narrative of that is sort of communicated to other defined groups of people, that gets shot down too. It says, look, Asians, Indians, Latinos, even some poor would be conscious minded whites. Look, these niggas do it to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you don't have to have pity for them. They're not that evolved. They're shooting themselves in it. But then all of a sudden, when you have this, you run the risk of exposing who true bullies are. Um, right? You can't sort of continue that mantra of, they're doing it to themselves per se. So
Right.
there is a risk to that.
Yeah, kind of the counter side of it. And that makes sense.
Like
Because
when you had the Crips and the Bloods unite, one of the most notable gang unifications came out of the Rodney King verdict. After they saw everybody saw the cops doing what they did. Now
mm-hmm.
imagine that had been happening to those black people on the West Coast for generations,
Right.
right? And there was never a unity of that magnitude that united until everybody saw it on the media, and everybody saw the cops get off, and then you had blue and red bandanas tied together on that level for the first time in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
What I've been pleased to see recently is young black people, even when they're at different Crips and Blood sets, talking about the West Coast,
Mm-hmm.
that say, yeah, those days of you getting rank in the organization by putting down another black man, or those days of us, out here just banging to be banging to put tears on our cheek. And
Right.
we out here about getting money, and we're gonna make music with whoever crossed the tracks. Nipsey, we all got love for Nipsey. It can be Blood Sets, Pyru Sets. We all got love for Nipsey Hustle, right? And
Mm-hmm.
whether they be rolling 60s or they be, neighborhood block crips, that I see this new sort of unity happening tentatively but persistently with some of these newer generations.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's an accident that it's in sync and lockstep with sort of this media bragger fest about killing black people. I
Right.
think that's the risk they run. They open a lot of eyes and not always in the way they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that is a good thing. I've been noticing the same thing, and I think that eventually it's only going to get better, especially like you said, as people begin to really see the bully for who the bully is, like you said. So they kind of shoot themselves in the foot at the same time, um, trying to flex a little too hard.
Yeah, and I don't think, since America was built on blood, slavery, thievery, robbery, rape, everything, and refuses to repent, refuses to make it right, refuses to do reparations. It's like building an upside down pyramid. You can't
Mm,
focus everything on a privileged few, right? And then make that the basis of a society, because if the pyramid is upside down,
right.
it's not going to balance. You have to have a strong base. So you have to make things right. You got to have things right at the base of your society, which is the masses of people.
Mm,
And then, right, there should be lesser privileged people, but this country is backward.
mm.
The very few privileged people own most of everything, and most of the masses are left with discontent, growing economic despair, loss in value of the dollar, just all types of crises. I mean, take your pick, A
Mm-hmm.
to Z, and that thing is not going to stand. So, and I don't want, I would counsel black people not to be surprised when it falls, because we've been dealing with white supremacy and oppression so long. It seems like a course of nature. It seems almost as real as mountains and a sunrise and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the day is coming when it's going to fall. you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
it's going to be a spectacular thing to see. The sad part is, we're going to have to live it too.
Right. Right. We got to live through it. Ain't no getting out of it. But that's facts, man. And yeah, it all correlates because even with the Asian hate movement, stop Asian hate movement, um, again, which brings me back to my point that you can see police brutality for generations and not get anything done specifically for blacks. But I mean, almost immediately you see stop Asian hate, and just like that, they get policy to protect them.
Policy. I think they got
Yep,
like $31 million. That was the latest sort of
yep,
federal allocation to.
yep. So and it's almost immediate. Like this was a direct response to how they were treated as it related to President Trump, um, basically driving the idea that the coronavirus is from Asia, and it was the Asians' fault. And they said that this was a rise. This contributed to a rise in hate crimes on Asian Americans. And I mean, that was very quick because COVID has been around in America, for about a year or so, and you just see how quick you get this turnaround. Even though you don't see the footage, you don't see it all over the news. You don't really see this Asian hate. It's just something that has said to have happened. It was believed. Nobody questioned it. Nobody um, dissected the Asian community and seen if they were perfect to make sure that they got everything together before they got any kind of policy to protect them. They didn't do all those things that you see them do with the black community and black people. As you
Right.
can see the suffering, it was just like, hey, that wasn't right, and wow, they got policy and they get relief immediately. And this could just be the beginning. You don't even know where it's going to go from there. And I think that that is a slap in the face, especially when people have been telling black people that we have to fight for people of color. And Asian people have been a part of that people of color. But when they get protection, they didn't get protection for people of color. They got protection specifically for Asian people. And the Asian communities should not have accepted it if they were genuine about being tied into the struggle that black people are suffering from, this same type of
Right.
oppression. And you know that, and that's not what happens. So that's how you know it's not genuine, how people will even use a black movement to get their own needs met, and then they'll just cross black people out like our problems are not even real. So it's a huge slap in the face by the government to do that. And I think that, again, like you said, that's going to open a lot of people's eyes because it's very blatant. And it's like when I see the Stop Asian Hate videos, if I see a hate video like on Yahoo, they say a guy who attacked the Asian woman, it's always that I've seen, it's always a black guy. So it's still not even addressing the Asian hate that's happening more frequently. Is still a racial undertone where they're going to pick these incidences where they find some black guy, attacking the Asian to still make it like the racism is coming from, black people and not the real people who are really promoting racism or executing these heinous crimes. So yeah, it's
Yep,
just
I agree, man. And I think I don't, that's nothing new. And that's, I would advise all people, especially black people, do your research, know history. Don't just exist in a moment. Existing in a moment is like being in a game for your life. Uh, like if you have a game where you start on square one and
hmm
it goes, say, to square 500, you wake up one day and you're on square 10 and you know nothing about, what's behind you, and you don't know where you came from. You have no point of reference. It's like being at sea with a ship with no compass.
hmm
When we exist as human beings and we're struggling, we have a past and a present, and then we use that to chart and compass and compass and plot a future. So this whole notion of like black people were here as slaves. We got freed around what was 1860, 1865 or so, on paper.
hmm
And when you start looking at sort of waves of immigrations, we know like Asians were key and they were involved in building the transcontinental railroads, right?
Right. Yep.
And they were brought in, they built railroads and everything. Again, when they came in, they were not slaves,
Right.
but it is mighty peculiar. They were brought in and they were used to sort of, they were used as a labor source that essentially might have undercut newly freed slaves that were now coincidentally vying for wages in their own businesses and things.
hmm
I mean, we had been all of our property, our bodies, our intellectual property, our labor was owned by other people. And it seems like on the heels of emancipation, and when emancipation was in the air, even all of a sudden, you get waves of immigrants that come in and are used to perform work. Now, granted, the United States used lots of Mexicans to dig ditches, to blow dynamite. They use lots of agents to work on railroads, etc. So it was the American system, capitalistic system, that took advantage of these different people groups. However, these people groups were used strategically,
hmm
and the result was always that they undercut and undergird black people. They undercut
Right.
black people rather,
Right. Yep.
and it's absolutely nothing new. And when you look at when black people started to make advances, whatever your opinions are on feminism, but we know that white feminists were highly upset when black people were getting the right to vote. Specifically, they say black men, but they leave out that at that time family structures were men, women, and children, and a vote from one member in the family benefited the entire family because they ate as a unit.
Right.
And so men would go out and vote. That was how the dominant society did it. So black people come along in the situation that we're at, and our men say, well, we're going to cast a vote too. Well, all of a sudden, now that's toxic masculinity. And
Right.
white females have a problem. So the women's suffrage movement
Hmm.
is born at the time when we're making progress and getting the right to vote. So
Right.
now you have feminism step in on the coattails and take the shine and ride on the swag of a black movement.
Yep.
And it's nothing new at all. But when you look at it contextually, historically, then you see, hey, black people are getting too much attention. There's too much talk about what black people are doing with their suffering. We got to keep the Negroes from, thinking they're too much or about themselves. We got to keep the world basically from looking too much at the Negroes. Let's do this
Hmm.
anti-Asian hate thing.
Right.
Not to mention that, and not no shade to any Asians, but because I believe it's all tied to, media and propaganda. But when you talk about assaults against Asians, you're talking about statistically, relatively, a, a relatively small number of actual physical violence events,
Right.
that could or could not be organic. It could or could not be these people, especially in terms of black people, just going out like, I'm going to hate and, do this to an Asian. I mean, that
Right.
could be really happening. It could be setups, not getting into that.
Right.
But usually it's something like name calling, insults, some
Hmm.
inconveniences. And at the end of the day, they still have a culture, a language, economic stability. They dominate in, educational and economic arenas. And,
Hmm.
when you look at black people and the condition of black people, I mean, there's absolutely no comparison.
Right.
But like you said, yet all the attention is there. And that points back to media versus truth and reality, you know. But it's like a plane. If reality and truth is like gravity, right?
Hmm.
Then media likes to fly everybody to the stars, or they like to fly. It's like putting people in a plane and making them believe they can defy gravity, and they
Right.
can fly and fly
Hmm.
around. But eventually, guess which one wins?
Right.
Gravity wins because the earth and gravity is here,
Right.
and eventually you're going to run out of fuel and you got to come down to earth,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. No, that's a good one. Nah, man, that's well put. I think that tackles that because it's so obvious. And I know when I saw that, I was just like, this is I didn't think it was crazy or anything because, like you said, it is not anything new. However, I think it is still a little surprising to see how many people are still in question of it. That's what surprises me the most is that people still want to argue, and it's like we have the historical documentation of the way that black people have been treated. So, unlike anybody else's history of oppression, especially in America, I mean, they have it right there in the laws that says, black people are not allowed to do X, Y, Z. So
Yeah,
there's really
exactly.
no argument. Like they put it in their own history book that this is the way black people was treated. So it's surprising that people would actually question that basically anything in the black community said against an oppressive group of people who've already proven that they are oppressive towards black people. That's what's surprising. Especially the people who are like, so-called liberal. Even the liberal people, they'll still kind of turn around at the end of the day and say, well, black people need to change what they're doing. That's really what they're gonna say at the end of any support, any Black Lives Matter support, any kind of support for Black people progress or Black communities. At the end of the day, even those liberal minds will eventually say, Black people, Black men need to pull their pants up first. that's what it's gonna boil down to. Or black people need to get off welfare and work harder. There's gonna be something. At least that's what I've noticed. And it's quite sickening because real lives are at stake, and this is real trauma that's happening to real people, but everybody want to make light of it, and um and then kind of rub it in your face with everything else. So
Yeah, I agree, man. That's but the thing is this: you're gonna have the majority, sadly, majority of people they follow because when there's no unity, when there's no intelligence, because we gotta think about the purpose and the effect of media and propaganda. And back in the day, I guess people would have to, go shout to the masses, and then use bullhorns or whatever, and then there was the printing press, etc. But now media has gotten entirely sophisticated, more and more sophisticated at propagandizing.
hmm
That when someone sees something, and even now, I think traditional channels like CNN and Fox or whatever, for the newer generations, those are even going by the wayside. But those have a huge audience, and
right.
people will assume the legitimacy of it.
hmm
So when CNN comes out and they trivialize black pain by flooding and saturating the market and even eventually desensitizing people to it, we all know who dies first in all of the horror flicks. We
hmm
know who dies first in reality and even in their fantasies. Even in their fantasies, right? Black guy gets on, you hear the whispering in the woods who said, that nigga is good as dead. And
right.
that was sort of the that's the cliche. That was the stereotype, which it showed, it revealed an aspect of their fantasy and the vision. And you're talking fiction. You're talking aliens from outer space. They
Right.
even hate black people.
Right.
So by the
Right.
time you get to this sort of media like this trivializing and downplaying and desensitizing uh, people to black death and pain and suffering, right? It's uh it's nothing new. And
hmm
when you get the masses that tune into that, unfortunately, right, it's the masses that will then follow. They see something on the news. The news are, they're professional people in suits, and they're educated, and this is what they do. Therefore, it's true and it's
Right.
real. They make that equation. And I think again that's one of the dangers of finding oneself outside of a historical context and understanding propaganda. And the few are the ones that think outside of the box. And it's on us to just speak the truth. Now, you gotta, in some cases, sadly, at the end of the day, there will be losses that are cut because a
Right.
lot of people will just not listen. Because the other thing about entertainment is it's very entertaining, and
hmm
people can get comfortable. You can sit on your couch and you can watch that story, and you can get engrossed in it
hmm
to the point where even the reality, the story of us, is sort of a fictionalized commodity. You can watch slave narratives, you can watch movies now, you can watch the revolution on film and TV, and you can see what people did, and you can see the George Floyd death on syncopation. And
hmm
it's all sort of becomes part of a commercialized reality, to whereas you have even Black Lives Matters, like individuals getting rich off of that, and it's
Yeah.
commoditized, it's commercialized, and people will tune in, and at one point it is a form of entertainment, even though it's their very lives and supposed to
hmm
be reality. It's still just like a big game show, and it's gonna be a lot of people will not come out of that,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, that's true. It's very true. And it just you actually just made me think of something else when you was talking about how even in the fantasy, black death is kind of just something that entertains other people, and it made me think of this case that I was reading about a death row inmate in Arkansas who was executed, and then the day after the attorney says he finds DNA that belonged to somebody else that would have exonerated this guy, right? And and it just made me think again where like it's like a joke to them where it's entertaining, where that people knew this information before he was killed, and they decided to release it the day after he was executed, and kind of rubbed it in the family's face where it's like,
Right.
oh, now this person is dead, but we just found DNA that would have showed he was innocent. Whole time I'm pretty sure he was saying he was innocent, because we know how those cases go. But just that constant, all different type of avenues where they just show black death. That's basically where I'm getting at, and how it becomes like this has to be entertaining because the way that it's playing out is just one thing after another, where they just want to show the helpless black person in a position that nobody wants to be in, which is facing death, and not having or having the illusion that they have no control over the outcome. But again, like you said, I do think that it is opening a lot of people's eyes, and people are starting to see, especially younger generations, and I think that's huge because when you can really get the attentions of younger people with that energy and charisma, I think that you will see more significant change because that's usually where it kind of starts. Like we need the older and middle aged people as guidance, and I feel like that gap has been strategically placed between the younger generations and the older generations.
Right.
But you slowly are starting to see those gaps be bridged as well. And I think that's where you're going to see the biggest impact is when the younger people see there's a reason why the older people are, basically demanding or have certain standards for them when they say certain things, and it's not to be malicious, like the oppressors who may say things to belittle you. You actually say things to encourage them when it's people alike. So when you tell people to have a little more self-respect for themselves, you actually mean that so that they can better themselves, and not you're not using it to basically make them feel bad about themselves or insecure, how other people use things against us. So
Well, right, exactly. And when you look at things in reality and you understand, again, reality in historical contexts, you know that it's not about what pants you're wearing
right.
or how you're wearing them, because when you talk about the lynching era, we went from a time to where we could only afford potato sacks.
Right.
You lynch a person that's got a potato sack with a rope tied around their waist because they can't afford pants and they don't have shoes. They've got cloth strapped to their feet and they're
Hmm.
lynched. And you fast forward to the heyday of the Black Renaissance. You talk about the writing expose in Illinois and Chicago, and you got Zora Neale Hurston and some of the other prolific Black writers of the Black Renaissance. These 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 folks were wearing suits.
Hmm.
Often wore suits with ties. Malcolm X generation, they wore the sort of jumpsuit, a sort of baggy pants with jumpsuits. Hell,
Hmm.
King wore suits all the time.
Right.
King was lynched. Malcolm was lynched. Uh, just this high profile lynching,
Yep.
made an example of, murdered. Uh, and so they weren't sagging, is my point.
Right.
But when you understand historical contexts, these sort of silly, trivial tit notions that the media throws out, intelligent people and sincere people don't bite on that.
Hmm.
And sometimes that bully can seem so big that any excuse you get not to face them it can be comforting. So that for a parent, if their child comes home and says, "Hey, I got assaulted by the teacher today, or I got accused of stealing in the store and I did," and that parent should be able to look in their child's eyes and see the truth there,
Mm-hmm.
or at least give their child the benefit of the doubt. But then their response is, "Well, why you take your ass around there?"
Mm-hmm.
Or "What was you doing? You had to be doing something." See, that's facing the child and not the actual problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
It's not even going to question the problem or
Right.
even get to the truth. Even if you suspect your child might be in the wrong, you your responsibility is to investigate. And when we talk about the older generation versus the younger, um, in the Willie Lynch letter, that was sort of one of the theories or the strategies that was spelled out by Willie Lynch. Whether people believe that was an authentic letter or not,
Mm-hmm.
it still is very precise when it
Right.
says older versus the younger, so that by the time you have someone in one generation, white supremacy tactics might have been one thing in that generation,
Right.
but the next generation is facing a different strategy and tactic,
Right.
and that previous generation has to respect and understand that,
Right.
so that when the younger generation says, "Hey, this is what we're facing. We know you guys locked arms and marched across the bridge. You tried that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not gonna say that was wrong per se. You shot a warning shot, or it was understandable. It was a valiant effort. Now here, there's a new game here. Look, we're doing a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you gotta respect that. That other generation has to respect that, and they have the duty to investigate and sort of be helpful. If not legitimate leadership, if it's time to pass the reins and hand off the baton, then be helpful.
Right.
You know, don't run, don't hustle backward.
Right. Right.
And I get I feel what you're saying. Yeah, oftentimes it's easier to say, yeah, niggas smoke and got their pants sagging.
Right.
Well, that's an easy thing to say. That's still not going to do anything about the legacy of white supremacy.
Right. Exactly. Yep. No, that's good, man. Well, yeah, man. I think that's kind of just what I wanted to touch base on. I wanted to just touch base on some of the more current things that was happening in society before we just to give something for the viewers and listeners to chew on. But is there anything you want to close out with?
I do. I want to make a quick note here. And what I want to say is the listeners, so this is a twofold thing. When I say Black people in the United States are special, I could mean that in terms of an identity and sort of a, a an identity or a destiny, or I could mean it situationally. The underdog in any given situation is always the one that it will mean the most when that underdog arises. Because when people look at situations and they're looking for inspiration to overcome obstacles, personal and public, in their own lives, there's nothing more inspiring than when an underdog rises and makes themselves free and overthrows the bully. So if people don't believe that Black Americans are special in terms of destiny, they will be special in terms of destiny if they, i.e., we, are able to overcome the bully. And when I say that, this is why I believe the eyes of the world, when it comes to looking at Black people in the United States, you have an example of the quintessential underdog generationally, from slavery, pre-slavery, but definitely by slavery, and then forward all the way through George Floyd times, and an uprising that spread the face of the planet. And I just wanted to segue backwards and just touch quick on when we were talking about quantum entanglement. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing that we didn't mention during that episode was quantum entanglement is positive and it can be negative. So when you have two different identities that can be locked together in a struggle. And a positive example of quantum entanglement would be, in a practical sense, theoretically, in a practical sense, as Black people uprise in the United States, specifically in that little city of Minneapolis over there, and then they rise up, and all of a sudden it sparks a revolution, and you see people rising up in London saying, yes, us too. Okay, that's an entanglement situation. Now, you can have negative entanglement to where there can be people groups to when they see something positive happening with that group, they will feel impelled to do the exact opposite, because one of the instances of entangled particles is that one particle can move right, and it means necessarily its entangled partner moves left. And we see examples of that in reality every time, quote unquote, we try and do something, quote, they seem to be immediately opposed to it. So you have these instances of entanglement. But I wanted to touch on that and say just what's at stake for us and what's at stake for the bully. Because if the bully is unable to defeat the little, the smaller, the weaker, the previously crying and begging victim, they have so much to lose, because once their true weakness is revealed on that entire school ground, right? Now everybody they've bullied to the same or lesser degrees across that entire yard is gonna say, you know what? He ain't so tough. He's, you know, he took my money. He did this, that, and the third. You know what? Me too. I just wanted to close on that, man.
That's perfect, man. I like that. So yeah, well, that's a wrap for today. We want y'all to subscribe, tune in. We got plenty of other videos already on the channel, so check those out, and
hit the like button.
Hit the like button.
Trying to paint a perfect picture in Excel. Things you didn't know, never moving backwards. Complicated, know what I mean? Trying to paint a perfect picture in Excel. Things you didn't know, never moving backwards. Complicated.
Shorty was taught to keep his head to the sky and never